This is Reese Kemp. I'd like to welcome you to the ministry of Raising the Standard of Truth with Reese Kemp. I'm back. I ain't been doing the videos in a while. I've been writing a lot. But today, I've been very inspired to do a video. Not inspired by a word that I wrote today. When I wrote the word, my spirit said I need to do a video, and people been inspiring me too. I've been looking at some people make videos on Facebook, and I've been paying attention to some of their teachings, and some people are saying some great things. God is revealing His truth to people, and people are just letting them gifts flow. And they inspired me to start doing videos. Not just I look at something like, man, I need to do videos because we need to do all we need to do to get the word out, to get the gospel of Jesus Christ spread across the world, around the world. But I've been inspired by people. People been doing good writings. They've been doing good teachings on Facebook. With videos. I do mine through writings, but I can do videos. I can do videos too. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, and some other people been inspiring me. People that talk about garbage. They don't talk about nothing. And they take up a lot of time talking about nothing. So they inspired me too. They inspired me to do something. Them doing nothing and saying nothing inspires me to do something and talk about something that need to be talked about. We're going to get right off into the word today. I wrote about the word. I wrote about power today. And it touched my heart because, I've been introduced to the power of God. It was the power of God that changed my life. It was the power of God that transformed me from being a drug dealer, a career criminal, a gangster disciple, a whoremonger, an uneducated man. It transformed my whole life, from going back and forth to the penitentiary. It transformed me to the man I am today. But let me talk about power before I get off into the word. I was introduced to power when I was in the penitentiary. I remember I was in this penitentiary. This is the first time I was in a minimum security penitentiary for good behavior. But I was in this penitentiary, and they let us go to an outside church in the penitentiary. And we went to this outside church in this little town in Minnesota called Red Wing. But in this little town, it was this one church that they let the prisoners go to. And it was all, I don't say white or black because people are that colors to me. I don't use the phrases. It was Caucasian, a whole church full of Caucasian people. I remember going in there. I felt like a sore thumb because I wasn't where I am now in my faith or my walk with God. I didn't have the understanding. I was just coming to God, but I wanted to know. I set my heart to know God. But it was a divine appointment that I was at that church. I remember when I first came into church, it was, like I said, it was all Caucasian church with a lot of kids. Kids was all sitting in the front, at the altar. They were sitting in the front. People, the mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers, they were sitting in the audience. And I remember this one guy, when I walked in, he was an older gentleman. Looked like he was at least in his 80s. But he was an older Caucasian gentleman. And he was in a walker. He was walking with a walker, so he couldn't walk or stand up that well. I remember he came to me and was excited, like he knew me, like he wanted to know me. But he reached his hand out to me and to shake my hand. I shook his hand. He grabbed hold of my hand. He said, "What's your name?" And I told him my name. He told me his name. I don't remember his name, but I was drawn to the love he had. It was genuine too, because we was prisoners. Their kids was there, their families was there, and they didn't care about where we come from or us being prisoners. They was treating us like we were one of them. And I grew up, and where I come from, I'm from the projects of Chicago. Ain't no white people or Caucasians, white people as you call them, or Caucasians. There wasn't no white people or Caucasians on 49th State Street in Vulture City. Chicago was a separated city. In Chicago, we didn't see Caucasians. It was just us. Chicago was separated. So, just the genuine love. I felt it. But that's not what the power I saw. I remember they entered into prayers. They was entering into prayer. That same man, he was stood up. I remember his walker was in the aisle, but he was standing up, and I was watching him because he the one reached out to meet me. You know, his love was genuine toward me, so I was watching him. He was a few feet away from me, but I was watching him. I was watching everything. You know, I was a spectator. You know, I wasn't into the praise or worship. I wasn't there yet. You know, I wasn't into praise neither. I was just paying attention to my surrounding because it was a different environment. It was all Caucasians. And me and a couple of prisoners, we was the only black folks there. We was the only colored people there. But I remember they started praising God. And this was the first time I heard people speak in tongues. I'm talking about not the tongues I heard when I went to some churches that I went to where it sounded like, it didn't sound genuine. It sounded like gibberish, a lot of churches I went to. But this one, at this church, it was different. I'm talking about the people, when they prayed, they was in unison in their prayer. They was all praying different prayers, but they was in unison. And then as they prayed, it was for some reason, it's like they knew to be quiet after they prayed. They knew to be quiet, but they was all praying individually. And they was praying, but it sounded good. And then I remember that it turned. It turned in such a way where they was no longer praying in their language, in their American language. They started praying in tongues. And it was different. It sounded like, I write poetry, so it sounded like poetry. It sounded like it was flowing. It sounded like water that was flowing. That's what it sounded like. And I remember they was all praying and they was in unison, even in their tongues, even in tongues. And then they all was quiet. They all got quiet. And I was looking. My friend was with me. He was crying. He was in the spirit. He was caught up in the spirit. He didn't stop crying till we got back to the pen. He cried all the way in his room in the penitentiary. And we were tough guys. So here this man is a tough guy. He cried. What he experienced at that church made him cry all the way to his room. I'm talking about to the penitentiary. And he couldn't stop crying. But I had to pay attention because it was for me. I was supposed to pay attention. You know, I wasn't supposed to enter into worship with them. I wasn't supposed to praise with them. I was supposed to experience power and see it for myself. But let me get back to what I was saying. Anyway, they were speaking in tongues and it was flowing like a river or something. It was like poetry. It sounded so good. I never heard anything like that today. But I know how I speak when I go into my heavenly language. I sound like them. You know, I don't sound like gibberish like other people. I speak in a multitude of languages because that's what God revealed unto me. That's what God impressed upon me when I was there. I picked some things up from being in that place. But I remember, as they was in the spirit, that older gentleman, everybody got quiet for a minute. It's like they knew to be quiet. They knew to let the spirit have his way. And that same older gentleman that came and shook my hand, I believe he put something on me. I believe he put something on me when he shook my hand like that. But I was watching him. He started speaking in tongues. Everybody else was quiet. And the tongue that he was speaking was so different. I never heard nothing like that. But it was beautiful. And I remember he's praying in tongues for a long time. And there was kids in the front row. They were sitting at the altar. This how they had church, and it was full. It was a small church, but it was packed. It was like families that grew up together, and they all was one. They all was in unison. And we was the only colored people there. Me and my friends. They weren't my friends. These were my associates from the penitentiary. But I remember that man got through speaking in tongues, and after he started speaking in tongues, he stopped. It was quiet. I never seen nothing like this before in my life. It was a little girl, a little Caucasian girl. She got up off the floor and she stood up. And she was not speaking in tongues. She was speaking in her own voice, but she was speaking like a grown person. This little girl started saying, "Thus said the Lord, I told you I would bring into you many nations." And she just went on and on and on and on, telling the church the word of God. But I was stuck on I told you I would bring unto you many nations. Because I looked around and we was the only colored people there. And this little girl, she was not old enough. She's not mature enough to speak the words that she was speaking. Everything that man spoke in tongues, she interpreted, or the Holy Spirit interpreted it and caused her to speak it out in the open for all of us to hear. And that's the moment when I knew God was real. That's when I ran into power. That's what changed my life. I was playing church at that point because I wanted to know God, but I wasn't serious. I wasn't serious. But that moment made me serious. And it was meant for me to be there. It was meant for me to experience. Like I said, I believe that older fella put something on me. And I seen it and that blew my mind. I wasn't crying or anything. I just paid attention to everything. And it changed my life. That was power. But, I spoke about power today on Facebook.